Hello, I hope you are having a wonderful end to your weekend. We have really one of my favorite webinars to do in an election cycle is our assessment of what the different policies are and where we think change might be occurring. I've been doing this for the last few election cycles, and I want to make sure everyone is very clear that this is not a political commentary. This is merely an assessment and an overview of the potential issues and positives that we see that could and may come up from not only the election process of actually having this all kind of front and center in our world right now. Anytime we're going into an election season, there's a lot more talk about what's happening in the market, what's happening in real estate. And that can go one of two ways. Either it can create a lot of fear and a lot of animosity, or a lot of positivity and a lot of hope for change or hope for, positive outcomes. So it's a wonderful, wonderful webinar I love to do, but just keep in mind, this is not a political commentary. Obviously, most of you who listen to me probably already know where I lie politically. And certainly if you followed my husband's political career, you probably know that as well. But this is not about that. This is about us as real estate investors, us as people who invest in our local market here in North Texas and specifically in our country, and what we see that's going to be coming from the 2024 election. This is a hot election. It is going to be contested, I think. I think it's going to be something that is a lot of turmoil, a lot of stress. And so the more that we can be prepared for that up front and understand the different challenges that I think we might have as a nation coming out of it, and really just what to expect, I think we'll be able to better pull together and pull through it, especially as it pertains to us being investors. We have an awesome webinar coming up on March 26th, the Debt Decoded. This is going to be a webinar all about mastering the strategy of good debt and bad debt. So this is coming up just right around the corner, just a few days from now. That'll be at 8 o'clock Central. There will also be a replay the next day at noon. Our full webinar schedule for the next month, we'll have the one today, Debt Decoded on the 26th, April 4th. We're going to have Protecting Your Property. This is going to be my 7 insurance strategies to build a profitable portfolio. On April 10th, we're going to go through short-term rentals, the good, bad, and the ugly. And then we're going to end the spring season with April 17th, our Wealth and Rentals virtual conference, which is our comprehensive overview of why real estate, why rental property, why North Texas, why single family, and how you put it all together. If you've missed any of our webinars, you can go and catch those recordings on YouTube. You can also, of course, listen to it on your favorite podcast channel. On Monday and Tuesday, Michael and I will be speaking at IMN here in North Texas, down in Dallas. This will be the Texas Middle Market Multifamily Forum. Michael is speaking Monday at 3 o'clock, and I will be speaking on Tuesday at 9:20. His is going to be talking about centralization versus regional, third-party management versus doing in-house management on multifamily. And then I'm going to be talking about a focus on workforce and affordable housing, which you all know is our specialty. Would love to see you guys there. If not, we will certainly do some follow-up about what we talk about after that as well. We have our in-person mastermind April 28th. This is part of our big spring fling weekend. This is a comprehensive small group environment with Michael and myself at our personal home in McKinney. Again, that is April 28th at 11 a.m. For more information, you can visit our website or go to that QR code. Talking about our spring fling, it's right around the corner, 1 month away. We'll have our big charter bus tour on April 26th, our spring mixer on the 27th here at our home, and then on the 28th will be that in-person mastermind I just mentioned. The big bus tour still has room. You can register. We will be capping that at, I think, 40 people. So we're probably getting pretty close to that. So if you're interested, use this QR code here to register for that event. Other property tours we have are going to be on April 5th. That's one of our regular bus tours, and then on May 3rd as well, and those run from 10 to 4. Before I begin, everything I'm going to talk about today is based on my best guess and experience, years of operating a real estate investment and management firm, and also being an investor myself. I'm someone who watches the news. I read all day, hours and hours a day, to make sure that I stay up to date on what's happening, not only in the real estate investment world, but in the world as a whole. Part of that is political monitoring, of course, but also just knowing what's going on in our world, in our country, in our society, and what we see happening in the markets, but not just real estate. That said, everything I say is what I believe, and it is what I believe to the best of my ability, but there are no crystal balls, there are no guarantees. The content that we're going to be covering today is political in nature, and I don't have any special, mind powers more than anybody else to know what's going to come. What my goal is for today is to talk to you about what I see being proposed and my thoughts on a lot of those policies, both new and old, and where I think us as real estate investors can vote and also make change by speaking out to make sure that we preserve the things that are important to us as investors. For those of you who don't know who I am a real estate investor. I'm a mom, I'm a wife, but everything that I do revolves around my love and my passion for real estate. My husband and I are middle school sweethearts. We have multiple businesses, all somehow related to real estate. Our portfolios of just over 40 million. We've been doing this for over 18 years, and we speak all over the United States on radio, TV, and on stages about our journey, about our model, and the uniqueness of what we do. We are both born and raised here in DFW, and I think that gives us a unique edge to really understand the market dynamics of what happened here and what is continuing to happen here over the course of the last nearly 2 decades. So again, I want to reiterate, this is not a webinar designed to change or influence your political affiliation. My goal here is to give you an idea of what you should expect in the investing world during the height and the changes from these election cycles and once this election is complete. Keep in mind, this webinar is not aimed at giving legal or tax advice. I'm not an attorney and I'm not a CPA. For any questions related to those two items, I want you to make sure that you talk to your CPA and your attorney. And I highly recommend, if you are not already having those types of conversations with your team about what could change, what could affect you, what upcoming things could be happening, then this is a conversation you want to start. One of the big ones I talk about a lot are opportunity zones. And a lot of people were very excited about these and wanted to opt into these. And we started the dialogue many years ago. Talk to your CPA, find out what happens if the next president or the next group that comes in to Congress doesn't want to allow those to continue. What happens? And so there's lots of things that may exist today that may not exist in the future, and their change could actually jeopardize your tax status. And so lots of little things to keep in mind, but the best guidance that I can give you from that standpoint is make sure you have an open dialogue with your CPA and your attorney as it pertains to potential law changes and how they could affect you. So what you should expect from this webinar is we're going to talk about the lessons that I've learned after all my time in real estate. I'm going to talk to you about what I've seen in the past and the historical trends, and then I'm going to tell you what's been shared with me. But remember, every person's situation is different, so how these things may affect you might be different. Election cycles are notoriously confusing, lots of information overload. And the thing to remember is that everyone's talking about the thing that they want you to be focusing on because they want you to vote for them. So a lot of things are skewed. A lot of things become very extreme and very polarized, but that doesn't necessarily represent what's really happening behind the scenes and what's really going on in our world. There are best practices and things that you should know as not only a consumer, but also a citizen about the implications and the impact of presidential election years on not only the real estate market, but the stock market in our country as a whole. That said, we are a red state here in Texas, and people invest here because of our fiscal conservative policies. I'm going to go over some of those policies for you today and why they tend to attract investors. And so, of course, most of the people that you're going to hear speaking about elections in Texas are likely going to be conservative. But that doesn't mean that we're not looking at both sides of the coin, and it certainly doesn't mean that we believe everything that is Republican. We're going to talk about understanding the landscape of where we are today, the legal implications, and then the tax implications of what is happening and what potentially is to come. And again, I want to encourage you to consult your CPA and attorney for advice for your specific situation. But of course, you can reach out to me with any questions after the webinar today. The big issues that are facing us today, according to the Wall Street Journal, are the economy, the border, climate, abortion, and foreign policy. So we're going to talk about the ones that can actually affect your real estate journey, which is pretty much everything but abortion, which is great because that's really not a topic I want to talk to you guys about today. We're going to be talking about all the things that can affect you from economy, from climate, from the border, and from foreign policy, because believe it or not, they all can affect you as a real estate investor. Most issues can actually have an impact on real estate business because of the prevalence in wealth building. Obviously, it's the way that most millionaires make their money, but this does affect both the average American and for the average lawmaker. Our goal for you is to help you get ahead of the issues to the point where those impacts aren't crippling, if there are any impacts at all. When it comes to the economy, Pew Research Center survey said that 73% of Americans have the economy as their top priority in 2024. Specifically, Americans said in this poll that they are concerned about interest rates, inflation, and economic growth, which makes sense because that's what's on everybody's minds. When it comes to immigration and the border, immigration has risen to the #2 issue for Americans in this election cycle. The way that can affect investors is population growth can drive demand. It can have effects on the labor market. It can also have market perception, specifically in Texas. And I'll even take that a step forward and say that depending on how our border is being handled, it can also affect crime rates. Specifically, the further south you go, the more it can affect that. When it comes to climate policy does affect real estate, but mostly through the threat of regulation on energy efficiency, building codes, and environmental protection. Texas may never pass all of these at a state level, but federal policy is its complete own animal. And the thing that you need to know about these three items is they cost money. So if these types of policies passed, things are going to be more expensive. When it comes to foreign policy, the major conflicts are in Israel and Ukraine, but that also can affect the real estate market. You should have a note for foreign investors that volatility in global politics or conflicts can also affect your domestic investors here too. But if you have the right relationships in the US, it won't cripple your journey. The thing that you need to remember is that oftentimes when we get into a recession or an economy that is struggling, somehow we find ourselves in war. And that's not a political commentary on that, it's just a fact of the matter. If you remember, when we look at times of war, it generally builds up the economy. So even in times that we've wound up in war, when the economy is doing wonderful, we go to war and it often helps boost it even more. So very important to keep in mind that not only can war affect where our people are, where our money is going, but it also can affect building up the economy here. When it comes to tax reform, we're going to talk in more heavy detail on this later, because this is probably, in my mind, the most important thing that may or may not affect us as investors. But it's important that you understand that the tax code is always talked about to death during the election cycle. However, there's only been 5 major tax reforms, and that's all since 1981. And four of those were done by Republican presidents, which aids those fiscally conservative policies. So depending on what type of president we have in office could depend on whether or not we see widespread or any tax reform at all. There are some other concerns, things like zoning and land use, affordable housing, infrastructure, and monetary policy. And we're going to talk about all of these in detail as they come up later in this webinar. Looking at a market overview, there are certain things that are true of nearly every single election cycle that we experience. I'm going to talk about these in detail so you know what you should expect over the next year. But there is one thing to keep in mind from now until Inauguration Day 2025, and that is to not overreact. Remember, the market is going to readjust as soon as the election cycle ends. I talk about this all the time. Crisis is what sells. Crisis is what the news wants. Turmoil, tumultuous, all those types of words are the things that we use to describe what an election year looks like in a news cycle. So keep in mind, don't overreact. When we talk about market uncertainty, you've probably been following the news, social media, and the candidates, and you've heard about a lot of uncertainty in the market. And that may mean that you want to take a cautious approach when it comes to your investments. But again, it's important you don't overreact. There's still a lot of room for you to invest as long as you're doing so smartly. So that means picking the right team, the right market, the right model, and the right property. And also making sure that you are following the right way to manage, tenant, sell, and everything that comes with having real estate and rental property. But it's not just about how you do your investing in real estate, it's also about your own personal home. And the thing that I will tell you is you have to keep in mind right now we have high interest rates, so we are in this what I've been calling the pause for the last few months. And at the end of the day, that's going to come to an end. You can always refinance a rate. You can always refinance an interest rate if your cash flow is not as strong as you want it to be for what you bought at those higher rates. But when rates come down and prices go up, you will not be able to manufacture lower housing prices again. Consumer confidence plays a huge role. The problem is not everyone is watching this webinar and not everyone is getting advice from people like me talking about what's really happening in the market. And many consumers are scared to invest right now, and that's been impacting all of us in lots of different ways. The news has been out there saying that we're going to be in a housing recession for 3 years, and yet here we are still not in a housing recession. When it comes to home buyers, they're skeptical, both due to the environment and interest rates, which are anticipated to drop this year. They're still saying 3 drops this year. We'll see. I still think it's going to be late summer before we start to see any traction. And other investors are skeptical, which means properties are ripe for the taking, which means you can take advantage. We and other industry experts expect 3 to 4 rate cuts this year, as I mentioned, and that tracks with ordinary election years. In 2000, we had 3 rate changes. In 2004, we had 5 rate changes. In 2008, 7 rate changes. In 2016, we had 1 rate change, and in 2020, we had 3 rate changes. I've been telling you for 2 years that this was going to be a very volatile year, but have incredible and immense potential for investors. And this is exactly what we are talking about. There are promises both real and false, though, so expect to hear a ton of promises from candidates about what's going to happen to the economy if you vote a certain way. And remember, you cannot trust your ears. You have to trust what you see. And there's regional variances too. Different regions can be affected more or less during the election cycle and after based on several factors. Battleground states, which are states that the candidates are fighting for, that they don't know that they're going to be able to win, are likely going to feel more of the effects of the election cycle because there's more visiting, more discussion, more advertising, and more tumultuous going on. And urban areas, those are the areas that are likely to be more targeted by fair use housing or infrastructure policies, which are more expensive and also lead to less fiscally conservative policies. This is one of the reasons why we don't invest in inner cities. Tourist destinations rely heavily on tourism, and they could be affected by travel and foreign policies. This is one of the reasons why I don't recommend investing in those areas. And manufacturing states or areas characterized by the history of manufacturing and industrial decline can be a focal point of an election, especially if they're talking about volatility in things like car manufacturing or chip manufacturing. Sometimes it's a positive, like in chip manufacturing. Sometimes it's a negative, like in car manufacturing. The thing to remember is that we live in a world where everything is at our fingertips, including information. And so one thing said wrong can completely turn the market on a dime. All you have to do is look at the posts that people like Elon Musk makes and what it does to stock prices that are related to him and things that he talks about. Now, there's a specific note on Texas I want to tell you. In Texas, specifically the parts that we're recommending you invest in do not fall easily into any of these categories. Our state's economy is believed to be safer than most during election cycles, and of course, I believe the strongest economy in the United States and one of the strongest in the world. Historically, what we see are historical trends and patterns during these election cycles, and they can offer valuable insights for you as an investor and as a homeowner. While each election year is unique, certain recurring themes and patterns have been observed in every election since I got into this business. We have market volatility, which expects heightened caution leading up to the election day. Long-term stability, focusing on the fundamentals and whether that will weather the uncertainty. The GDP and unemployment, you should expect changes in major economic indicators. What we see now is a world where we go back and revise our numbers constantly, so it's really difficult to know what the real numbers actually are. And housing slowdowns. Buyer skepticism can lead to a brief period of a slowdown, although there's no signs of that happening this year. And a note on opportunities. With so many investors and buyers who are trying to wait out the election season and specifically higher interest rates, you can really win big by looking for the bargains and capitalizing on the expected market dip. However, keep in mind, we don't believe there's going to be a dip. In fact, we're already seeing the signs of an early spring and summer market, which means your opportunity is now. The dates that you need to know: March 5th was the primary day in Texas. July 15th to 18th is the Republican National Convention. And August 19th to 22nd is the Democratic National Convention. On September 16th, it'll be the first presidential debate in San Marcos, Texas. September 25th, it'll be the vice presidential debate in Easton, Pennsylvania. October 1st, the second presidential debate in Petersburg, Virginia. And October 9th, the third presidential debate in Salt Lake City, Utah. Now, one caveat is we live in this strange new world where presidents don't necessarily debate each other. They don't always agree to come to the table with each other. And I think that's an extremely high likelihood this year should Biden and Trump be our candidates. So if these dates don't happen, just remember that you heard it here. I think they probably won't. October 7th, we'll have voter registration deadline. October 21st, early voting will begin. October 25th, absentee application deadline is up, and November 1st, early voting will end. And then finally, that leads us up to November 5th, which is Election Day. Now, we're going to talk about the implications of the election cycle and the results from two different perspectives. We're going to look at it from a legal implication and a tax implication side, because for those of us that are real estate investors and those who own property and really just live and work in the United States, those are the two most important things that are going to affect us, and especially on a faster scale. But a note on hypotheticals. We've stepped out of history now and we're looking to the future. And while I don't have a crystal ball, I am talking from nearly 20 years of real estate experience and an astute understanding of American politics. But again, you want to consult those experts in your life for advice on your specific situation. When we talk about housing affordability, there's a potential this election cycle for proposals to address the cost of housing. This could be a double-edged sword for us as investors. There's pros like that's going to create more demand, stable income from renters, potential incentives, and the social impact that's positive, which, as a human being, I understand this critical crisis that we have right now in our housing shortage and affordability. But as an investor, of course, we don't want anyone telling us what we can or cannot do with our properties and the price of said properties. In fact, Texas has been and remains strong against this. The cons of this are lower profit margins, sometimes lower tenant quality because of what we are forced to take, limited flexibility, and more red tape. President Biden has unveiled his new plan to lower housing costs, and he's calling for Congress to pass this plan that includes down payment assistance, mortgage relief credit, lower closing costs, and tax credits for builders. Sounds a little bit like the last crash in 2008, doesn't it? The White House has also prepared a blueprint for renters' rights. They've called this the Renters' Bill of Rights. While this doesn't actually institute policy, it sets forth recommendations that the administration says would make housing fair, accessible, and diverse. You can read it at this QR code here. What I'm here to tell you, of course, is I'm vehemently against a renter's bill of rights. And as an investor, you should be too. The thing that really scares me is rent control. And of course, I'm very thankful and blessed to be in Texas, a state that has fought hard against rent control. But I recognize and understand and hear all the time from clients in other states, specifically California, about the dangers of rent control. The White House is calling for lower rent. A quote from March 7th housing plan said, the Biden-Harris administration is taking action to combat egregious rent increases and other unfair practices that are driving up rents. Because of course it can't be that rents have gone up and values have gone up, investors' expenses have gone up, and so the market is allowed to respond accordingly. Anytime we walk down a road where the government can tell us what we can or cannot charge, what money we can or cannot make, that's a very dangerous path as real estate investors. While there are positives and negatives to affordability incentives in general, if the policies lean all the way to rent control, that's extremely bad news for investors, and it's a very slippery slope. Rent control would limit how much landlords can charge and generally see more support from the left. That can lead to reduced profits and imbalanced market. It opens the door to off-the-book deals and maintenance challenges. It also leads to a market where laws start to change for things like evictions. All of those things that we hold dear here in Texas to be able to have that landlord-friendly climate hinge on not having government control in our rental property. Meanwhile, President Trump is aiming to build more affordable housing by eliminating red tape and removing expensive regulatory barriers. Even though we just saw a major infrastructure act, we could see proposed or implemented revisions to that. That could lead to changes in demand, in property values, and construction costs. Infrastructure investment is a big hot topic of this election, as it was in the last. The Biden administration recently passed the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, and they spent $1.2 trillion on this. Some of the pros of that act are the record-setting investment in physical infrastructure. They did not increase the corporate tax rate, and they removed red tape when it comes to construction projects. The cons are it canceled employee retention tax credits early, it did not address the jobs outsourcing, and it put a lot of power in the hands of the federal government. The bigger the government, the more difficult our lives are as investors. On fair housing policies, fair housing laws would aim to address, based on what we're seeing, housing discrimination and gentrification. The Biden administration's blueprint for the Renters' Bill of Rights focuses heavily on fair housing policies. And that adds a lot of red tape for investors who are trying to rent out properties, and specifically for those of us working in infill property to revitalize these areas, or as they love to call it, gentrification. These proposals could influence the ability of the younger generation to enter the housing market, which here in Texas, we have more youth entering the housing market under the age of 18 and turning 18 than anywhere else in the country. In February, the Biden administration canceled student loans for more than 150,000 borrowers. On one hand, that allowed more young homebuyers to enter the housing market, but on the other hand, that cost can only be offset through taxes, which will hurt high income taxpayers and in reality, likely middle income and potentially high low income as well. Former President Trump has a long record of opposing debt cancellation. His quote from June of this year or last year was, "The Supreme Court also ruled that President Biden cannot wipe out hundreds of billions, perhaps trillions of dollars in student loan debt, which would have been very unfair to the millions and millions of people who paid their debt through hard work and diligence." When it comes to zoning and land use policies, these are usually discussed more at a local and state level, not a federal level, but they still can be relevant to investors because the only things that affect us are not just at the federal level, it's also local policies as well. Investors, especially those who rent out properties, tend to thrive during housing shortages. So the less regulation on residential zoning, the better, though there can be other benefits as well. And when we talk about foreign investment, those regulations can have huge implications, especially for foreign investors investing here in the United States. They could be subject to reviews or withheld funds, or taxes, or limitation of being able to invest at all, depending on where they are from. Consumer protection laws are another big topic, and these regulations safeguard consumers' rights and interests in transactions aiming for fair treatment, transparency, and accountability. This all comes from businesses so that they can help or hinder you, dependent on the specific regulations. Environmental regulations have been a hot topic for many elections, and certainly we've seen a push almost backwards. We started all of this with our electric vehicles and solar power, and now we're starting to see even automakers pull back on some of these environmental regulations. They impact property value, development opportunity, compliance costs, and investment strategies. And these are all things we don't necessarily want to deal with, going back to that red tape analysis. And again, environmental policies are generally promoted by Democratic administrations. Biden-era climate policies, including limiting vehicle emissions, opposing fossil fuel production, and increasing alternative energy usage, have cost America the better part of $1 trillion. Love it or hate it, that money has to come from somewhere. Trump-era climate policies focused on the America First Energy Plan approved 2 large oil pipelines. His administration also allowed drilling in U.S. waters and repealed several pollution control policies. One advantage of environmental policies is the potential for tax credits for adhering to initiatives. If you've ever replaced your AC, you've ever replaced your windows, you might have taken advantage of some of these. But when we talk about a specific note on Texas, policies that affect oil and gas or fossil fuel usage can have a heavy impact on Texas as a whole, and specifically, of course, on our cities along the coast. Lobbyists and Texas politicians will die fighting, making sure regulation on these are not changed. Texas is very, very energy dependent. While we're on this topic, I want to also tell you to remember, most politicians on both sides make their money through real estate, and thus they have a huge vested interest in protecting the rights of investors and your ability and their ability to make money. But here's the big one. Tax reform, or the conversation around it, impacts all of us in many ways. Let's take a look at the different ways how. Any law that affects taxes can have significant implications on your investing game plan, your cash flow, your profit margins, and your overall return. When we talk about income tax rates, leading up to an election, income tax rates and the threat of them increasing is always a talking point. And each of these can be damaging to investors. Tax rate adjustments, marginal tax bracket changes, and progressive tax reform. Democratic candidates generally advocate for increasing taxes for high-income earners, decreasing taxes for low-income earners, and that typically involves new tax brackets, raising rates, and adding a wealth tax. When we talk about corporate tax reform, there are also proposals that are aimed at increasing the corporate tax rate that would increase your corporate taxes, modify tax deductions, and reform the international tax rules. We don't like any of this. Income tax rate increases, progressive tax reform, and corporate tax reform. And thus we have a vested interest in not seeing taxes raised. Right now, many tax rates are being protected or reduced by the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, which was passed by President Trump in 2017. But it's set to expire in 2025, which is going to bring up taxes on high-income earners as well as corporations. So quite literally, our tax law, our tax rates, our tax benefits hinge on this election. What would happen if that expired? Federal income taxes would go up for almost all Americans, impacting households making anywhere between $180,000 and $365,000. Corporate taxes would rise. There would be more confusion in filing because the simplified version would expire. Standardized deductions would be minimized. Fewer subsidies and deductions would be allowed. Higher gift and estate taxes and child tax credits would be reduced. The capital gains tax is another specific item of concern because those are the taxes that are imposed on the profit earned from the sale of real estate. And these are the taxes we really don't want to see go up because it impacts our short-term and long-term profitability as investors. 1031 exchanges are one of our favorite tax rules. They allow investors to defer your capital gains by reinvesting in similar properties. And there in every election is conversation about changes to these rules, but it's extremely unlikely, as I've said, every other update I've given, because Congress has a vested interest here. However, President Biden's most recent budget proposal says, and I quote, the budget closes the quote like-kind exchange, which is a 1031, loophole, a special tax subsidy for real estate. This loophole lets real estate investors, but not investors in any other asset, put off paying tax on profits from deals they indefinitely keep as long as they keep investing in real estate. With the depreciation rules, tax reform could modify the rules that allow us investors to deduct depreciation expenses and claim tax benefits. Things like cost segregation could be impacted, slowing down cash flow and impacting investors' tax liabilities. As a note on depreciation, we're not going to get into the specifics of cost segregation here, but I do have 2 links here if you want to learn more about not only the process, but also becoming a real estate professional in the eyes of the IRS. When we talk about pass-through entity deductions, tax reform laws could introduce or modify deductions for these pass-through entities like LLCs, partnerships, S-corps, and REI trusts. Tax reform laws could impose limitations on the deductibility of mortgage interest, which impacts your financing options, the cost of capital, your leveraging ratios, and your lending options. And the carried interest taxation refers to the tax treatment of the type of investment income received by certain real estate partnerships. It essentially allows some of the profits earned by a fund to be taxed differently, and changes could affect not just the fund managers, but all recipients of a fund as well. Foreign investment, estate taxes, property taxes, and mortgage interest deductions could also have tax implications. The good thing is there's many ways that tax reform can negatively impact us, but it's also important to go over the ways that it can help us, specifically dependent on what they do. About the only positive that comes from tax reform are the tax credits and incentives that might attract certain types of developments and investments, but these aren't even guaranteed and really shouldn't be counted on. Now, we're going to compare the candidates and break down a brief synopsis of the candidates' positions on both tax reform and budgets. President Biden's position, the headline read, President Biden's tax cuts for working families and makes big corporations and the wealthy pay their fair share. He supports more corporate taxes, high income tax increases, increasing the child tax credits, cutting taxes for working class Americans, and requiring wealthy to pay more towards Medicare. He opposes the existence of 1031s, the carried interest loophole, tax subsidies for investors, tax subsidies for oil and gas, capital income tax breaks, and corporate tax breaks. When we look at former President Trump's position, his headline, President Trump achieved the biggest tax cut and reforms in American history, providing relief for the middle class and small businesses. He supports simplifying the tax system, cutting the number of brackets, allowing tax-free estates, keeping the existing tax deductions in place, and lowering taxes in general. He opposes increasing the taxes on the wealthy, increasing corporate taxes, healthcare mandates, lowering standard deductions, and offshoring corporate money. As an overview, these are the things that we can do now as investors and as Americans to make sure that we can weather whatever the election throws at us. There's a lot of information and misinformation about policies that could be proposed by either party. You can help yourself by following trusted news sources, engaging in discussions, and reading up on the issues. And I encourage you to listen to both sides. I listen to Fox, I listen to CNBC, I listen to CNN, I listen to ABC, I listen to the BBC, I read Newsbreak. There are so many different places out there, and each one is going to give you their spin on the information. And you want to make sure you're getting all sides so that you can make an informed decision. That's what journalism is supposed to be, by the way. That's what it was 20, 30 years ago. It certainly, in my opinion, is not what it is today. So we have to take a step further and listen to all the different sources so that we can make an educated decision. When we talk about scenario planning, you want to conduct scenario analysis to assess the potential impact of different outcomes on the real estate market so that you can be prepared for whatever's to come. Those scenarios can and should include the possibility of diversifying your investments, assessing financial options, and debating the benefits of cash flow versus appreciation. Anticipate potential market reactions to election results and be prepared to act swiftly. Remember, market volatility may present opportunities for strategic acquisitions or adjustments to your portfolio. One of the largest of which I believe is going to be the reduction of interest rates to increase sentiment in the economy going into the election. Tax credit opportunities are something that you want to stay informed about that can relate to encouraging certain developments and affordable housing. You want to make sure you lean on your team to cultivate strong relationships with fellow investors, advisors, and mentors and other experts. Networking, as always, can provide immensely valuable insights and support, especially during times of uncertainty. And consult the experts, seek legal counsel, especially regarding your tax issues. They can help you understand how to optimize your strategy, how to understand conditions that may affect you, and minimize your liability. And most important of all, get out and vote. It's important to make sure your voice is heard. Do your civic duty and make sure to cast your vote on or before November 5th. I want to encourage you to join our Wealth and Rentals Facebook group. This is 24/7 investor talk, breaking news on the market, access to Michael and other experts along with myself answering your real estate questions, and we will be keeping you up to date on what is happening with the election, with the economy, and with our local market. If there are things in this that you want to discuss further or you want to talk about your portfolio or strategy, I have time in my available schedule for consult calls. I do these all day, every day. A 30-minute call costs you only $125, and I do more than an hour of research before we ever meet. They're a great value to jumpstart your investment model, reassess where you're at, or come up with a plan to move forward. And of course, as always, we have our mentorship program, our elite membership. This is amazing, amazing value if you are in a growth phase and wanting to take your portfolio and your real estate investing journey to the next level. You can follow us on all the social media. I encourage you to follow Slaughter Investing, our Wealth and Rentals Facebook group, and follow me personally, where you can see all the things that I am doing personally, not only in my own life, but also in real estate and investing. And again, on your way to work, on your jog, whatever you're doing, you can find any of these webinars on our podcast channel as well. If you haven't joined our mailing list, this is the best way to stay up to date on first information for upcoming events, exclusive deals on masterminds, consult calls, in-person appearances, events, and more, and reminders about upcoming webinars and other media that you won't want to miss. You can also join our texting list to receive the same information. And if you still have questions after all that, you can contact us always by email, on our website, or by phone. Thanks so much for watching. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. And please remember, the one takeaway I want you to remember, don't panic. The news is designed to scare you. The news is designed to make you think. Let it challenge you to think about what you think is right, how you can support yourself as an investor and our country around you. And whatever happens in November, whoever wins, don't let the media and don't let our world tear us apart. We are one world, one people. And I'm so incredibly thank you to have you as a part of our Slaughter Investing family. Take care.